The most sophisticated effort to address the issue, carried out at Carnegie Mellon University, found conclusively that at least some of the protesters on Institutska Street were killed by Berkut forces on the ground. The violence of February 20th demolished the government's legitimacy in the eyes of many in Ukraine and increased people's resolve that Yanukovych had to resign. It had the same effect in the West, which previously had sought to broker solutions that would have kept him in office. Even more important, as it became clear that Yanukovych might lose power, his supporters began hedging their bets or simply abandoning him. Beginning with Kiev Mayor Volodymyr Makeyenko, Party of Regions officials began announcing their defection from the party. They were likely appalled by the violence and were also probably determined to retain their positions once power shifted. The fear that they might be confronted by protesters without the security forces to protect them would have underscored their decisions. On the night of February 20th to 21st, Yanukovych belatedly came to an agreement with the three main opposition party leaders. The deal was brokered by the foreign ministers of France, Germany, and Poland, along with Russia, which sent human rights ombudsman Vladimir Lukin, apparently at Yanukovych's request. The deal included a return to the 2004 constitution, formation of a unity government, including opposition members, and early elections, in return for the protesters leaving occupied streets and buildings. A ceremony was held in which the opposition party leaders and Yanukovych, along with the three Western foreign ministers, signed the agreement and shook hands. Though Putin was later to excoriate the West for the deal's abandonment, Russia decided not to sign it. The terms negotiated may have garnered support from protesters a few days earlier, when Yanukovych rejected them, but after the violence of February 20th, Yanukovych's resignation was now a non-negotiable demand for many. In a meeting with the Coordinating Council of the Maidan, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski urged the protest leaders to accept the deal. "If you don't support this deal, you will have martial law, the army. You will all be dead." The group reluctantly agreed to back the deal by a vote of 34-2. When Vitaly Klitschko appeared on the stage at the Maidan to announce the deal the next morning, February 21st, however, the crowd vocally opposed it. Volodymyr Parasyuk, a 26-year-old leader of one of the self-defense groups that had been engaged in a bloody battle the day before, took the stage to denounce the deal and to issue an ultimatum. If Yanukovych did not resign by 10 a.m. the next day, the protesters would start taking government buildings by force. This met with the crowd's approval. The protesters on the Maidan thus rebuked the opposition party leaders, rejected the agreement that many hoped had resolved the crisis, and upped the ante. The violence of February 20th had not frightened the protesters, but rather enraged them and steeled their will to finish the job. While the security forces retreated, the protesters expanded the territory under their control and strengthened their barricades. When the Ukrainian parliament met on the afternoon of February 21st, many of the Party of Regions deputies and Communist Party deputies did not show up for the session, leaving parliament in control of the opposition and recent defectors. The parliament passed a measure of returning to the 2004 constitution, decriminalized the acts under which Yulia Tymoshenko had been imprisoned, and amnestied those arrested during the protests. It also fired Interior Minister Zakharchenko and forbade the armed forces from attacking the protesters. While Yanukovych had agreed to some of these measures, the parliament had essentially turned on him, as Party of Regions members announced that they were leaving the party. It was reported that many of these deputies had abandoned Kiev, along with other Party of Regions leaders. Yanukovych himself had left the city after signing the agreement with the opposition leaders. Seeing Yanukovych's political support eroding, security forces abandoned their posts in large numbers. Several thousand were escorted out by protesters. Many others simply left. Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski, who had warned the protesters of a violent crackdown, called this development astonishing. The Yanukovych government was collapsing, leaving a vacuum. Yanukovych left Kiev apparently for a previously scheduled meeting, strengthening the perception that he had been defeated. Late that night, Yanukovych left Kiev for Kharkiv, and for a time, it was not clear exactly where he was. The next day, February 22nd, Speaker of the Parliament Rybak resigned, claiming to be ill. The Parliament declared that Yanukovych had abandoned his office. On those grounds, it elected Oleksandr Turchinov of Batkivshchina Party as acting president, and scheduled presidential elections for May 25th. While Yanukovych was effectively ousted, he was removed without going through the constitutionally prescribed impeachment process, which would involve several steps, including a vote by 3/4 of the total membership of Parliament. The shortcuts taken led many to see the ouster as flawed or even illegitimate, and were grounds for the charge, made by Putin and by some Western critics, that the events of February 21st to 22nd constituted a coup. In Kharkiv, on February 22nd, Yanukovych recorded an address denouncing the steps taken to remove him and declared that he would not resign. He apparently tried to travel from there to Russia by air, but was denied permission. Instead, he traveled by car to Donetsk and onto Crimea, where Russian forces took him to Russia in the evening of the same day. As became clear later, he had begun preparations to leave Kiev on February 19th, before the worst day of violence, before he signed the deal with opposition leaders that would have kept him in power at least until new elections, and before the ultimatum from the Maidan. The way that the protests ended played an important role in the composition of the interim government. The most important spots in the new government, including that of Prime Minister, were held by Tymoshenko's Batkivshina party. But because the far-right groups had played a central role in forcing Yanukovych from power, they successfully demanded several spots in the new government. The willingness of the mainstream parties to ally with the far-right groups was cited by both Russian and Western critics as evidence of the illegitimate nature of the new government and of the threat to Russians in Ukraine. Among the first measures passed by the post-Yanukovych parliament was a reversal of the 2012 language law. To head off controversy, interim President Alexander Turchinov refused to sign the new law, leaving the 2012 law in place. But this was not widely reported. Instead, the attempt was reported as a sign that an aggressive nationalist agenda would be pushed. This view was spread widely by Russian media and fit with the narrative that Ukraine had been taken over by right-wing extremists. While in substance the reversal of the law was not far-reaching, and symbolically it was very important to many of those who had supported the protests, it was a tactical blunder, feeding the narrative that Russia and Yanukovych, who was now in Russia, were promoting.